after this interview, we'll see more people at the calf raise after the deadlift platform. So let's move on. So kind of on that viewpoint that strongmen, we don't need to do that bodybuilding stuff, that arm curl. There's a common thought, and I do this when we're trying to self fix, and basically that is if it's not broken, keep training, right? Train around the pain. I know there's obviously some truth around that. So one is that just in general, if you do not have any context, is training around the pain a good plan?
Yeah, I think without any context, training around pain is a great option. Consistently, we see that if someone is physically active, they have better results across the board for reducing pain, injury, etc. There's just a recent paper that just came out highlighting how important moderate and vigorous exercise was for the decrease of all pain. It just showed that if someone was regularly physically active doing moderate or vigorous exercise, they had a significantly less likelihood of pain across all sites. And so or for back pain, I believe, back pain. So being physically active is huge. And if you have an injury, trying to train around it to the best ability to stay physically active, just from a standpoint of likelihood of pain, is good. But then also for people's mental health, et cetera, like, I don't know about you, but if I can't train, I lose my mind. Like I'm pissed off, I'm irritable, I'm just not the person people want to be around. Whereas when I'm training, I'm very happy. So that is huge. Yeah, just train around what you can.
Okay, so because that's the extent of my PT knowledge. And so if I was having them do some sort of horizontal pressing, said, "Hey, try the dumbbells." I said, "How's that feel?" They said, "It doesn't hurt." I said, "All right, let's just do that." And generally, from what I understand, is your body's smart. Pain is your body telling you to stop doing this. So generally, however, so this is where it's a bigger issue, I think, is what amount of pain. I obviously, I don't think there's a definite answer here, but how, strongman, we have a tendency, and not just strongman, other strength athletes and extreme athletes, we have a tendency to maybe push that boundary too far, right? So, like, what are some good ways to tell if it's too painful? Now, obviously, that's a very difficult question to give, right? But is it like, I don't even know, shooting pain, sharp pains, pain for 3 days, or like what is some good guidelines where we can kind of judge this is kind of normal and this is a problem?
So whenever I'm working with people for different injuries, I have a general rule of thumb. Unless the condition for some reason specifically outlines that having pain during it is bad, I'm okay with roughly a 3 to 5 out of 10 pain. The reason I say that is that there's a number of studies that have compared having people work into pain, and the individuals still do very well, no issues generally for most conditions. There's even one study specifically looking at having people train pain-free and one group train with pain up to 5 out of 10. And they ended up with essentially the same timeline for returning to sport. So with that considered, I usually allow people to train up to roughly a 5 out of 10 pain, which I allowed them to determine what that means. I never tell people, oh, you're only at a 2 out of 10, so push harder. Everyone has a different perspective on how intense pain is. And so I'm not going to try to dictate that. Then the other part that I add on to that is that when we finish the session, your pain may persist. It's entirely possible you just pushed into something, you pissed something off. It might be irritable. But what I want to see is that by 24 hours, it has come down slightly. And by 48 hours, it is back to where it was before the session. And so for an example, like if someone has shoulder pain and we're doing log press as a way for treating it, we're going to do our log press. We're going to work on X, Y, and Z. I'm going to allow them to push up to that 5 out of 10 pain. After the session, if it stays 5 out of 10 for the rest of the day, not inherently concerned. The next day, I'd like to see it come down to 3 to 4 as a minimum. If it does, we're good. The next day, I want to see it return back down to whatever it was the day before, like that first day. So if it was a 1 out of 5, I want to see it come back down to 1 out of 5. If it's still 2 days later a 5 out of 5, I'm going to tell them that the next time that we do this, we need to be at a lower intensity and not push to such a high pain scale, because their shoulder is just currently not able to tolerate that. And that it's just going to take a few more sessions to work our way to that point. And usually that works very well for most people.
Okay, cool. So basically, I'll recap that. So if you feel pain, work up to about a 3 to 5 out of 10. That can stay there for the first 24 hours. That next day, it should drop some. And then the day after, it should be back to before the workout to normal.
Yeah.
After that, you need to, if it's still persisting or stronger, then you need to maybe decrease the intensity or so forth. And depending, maybe you need to see a specialist or whatever, but that's all within. Mm-hmm. All right, cool. So all right, yeah, because I think that's very simple and very applicable and very, very easy guideline to use, because obviously I always tend to push it too far. I've been lifting enough now, and I don't, but I remember this back, and we all are. We've all gone through that phase. It's like pushing is way too hard. All right, cool. So, this is a big question, not really a big question, but I think it's a question that a lot of us have as strongman, is proper warm up for a competition. If anyone's watching who's not familiar with a competition in strongman, it can be insane. You can have hours of waiting between an event, then you do an event, and then that next event might be 20 minutes later. Then after that event, it might be another hour. You have limited selection of implements. You may have, if you're going to be doing 700-pound, 18-inch deadlifts, you might only have access to 300 pounds. So having a proper warm-up is vital. One, you want to be able to perform well. 2, you don't want to get injury, but 3, you don't want to get fatigued. I remember my first competition, I was just warming up, like for hours. And probably if you were to put all the time together, it was probably hours. I was just, because I had no idea what I was doing. And so I had an hour break in between my event, and I wanted to be ready. So I just warmed up the whole time. So that being said, how do we fix that? I think there's always that aspect that it's not going to be perfect, and that's the sport of strongman. But what's the best way that we can kind of prepare and mitigate that issue?
Yeah. So whenever we look at an ideal warm-up, we're going to be addressing 3 main components. Number 1, tissue temperature. As the name states, you need to legitimately warm up. There are a host of benefits that come from being legitimately warmer. And when I say warmer, I mean like your actual core tissue or core temperature, and as well as the local tissue. So if you're going to be doing a pressing exercise, like if we have a pressing medley, ideally you want to have some sort of actual upper body pressing tissues warmed up, as well as your general core. Then, in addition to that, you want to have what we call tissue pliability. So the tissues that are going to be working are able to go through the ranges of motion that they need to, and without a high amount of challenge. A part of that comes from actually getting those tissues warmed up. And the second part is working through the ranges of motion that they'll have to utilize. And then the last thing is what we call tissue excitability. And that one, I'd say, of the 3, is probably the hardest to legitimately manage in competitive strongman, due to the nature of the things you pointed out, like the limitations and equipment that's available for warming up. So you can't stay warm 8 hours a day. Like, it's not uncommon for a strongman competition to last 8 hours. It might be 4 hours, it might be 8 hours, but in general, like that length of time being warmed up the whole time is just fairly unrealistic if we're talking about actually exerting. It'd be very hard to like stay reasonably active that whole length of time. Yeah. You basically be doing a marathon. So, and I'm sure most strongmen don't want to do that. So what we want to do instead is try to figure out how we can have some creative solutions to these problems. And something that I've done with a lot of strongman and also other sports like CrossFit, for instance, because I work with a handful of CrossFit athletes, and they deal with a similar problem where they might have 4 or 5 events in a given day. It'll start at like 7 a.m. and it'll go to like 4 or 5 p.m. And they just have huge gaps in time between these events, but they have to be ready to go hard, and they might not get a ton of notice of when they're specifically going to go. So to address this, an easy solution to the first problem of staying warm is utilizing layers of clothing. The way that if you watch a lot of people in other sports, they do this. If you watch something like track and field, it's not uncommon to see someone like Usain Bolt come off. He just finishes one of his heats. He's got another one half an hour later. And as soon as he walks off, he's putting on track pants, a track suit, etc., like putting on layers, because instead of having to move around to be warm, he's utilizing clothing to stay warm. And the advantage here is that it helps to maintain your core temperature a slightly higher degree. And once you start actually moving again later, it'll allow you to get warmed up faster. So that's one of the easiest things, having multiple layers, something that even if you're in a warm place, like I know you live in Florida, having multiple layers is going to get you warmed up so much faster when you're in a warm temperature. For me, I'm up here in Canada. It's generally kind of cold. So having lots of layers is a really good option, just so that once you do start warming up and you're just sweating, you can just start to strip things off as you get ready to walk off onto the competition spot. Then the next thing, again, is that tissue extensibility. So if you have to do pressing, we want to be able to get your arms above your head, go through a full elbow flexion, etc. If you're deadlifting, you want to be able to bend through your spine, bend through your hips, bend your knees, etc. And so this is one where doing some sort of like dynamic warm up instead of a specific movement. Like if you're doing pressing, maybe you aren't going to do some direct pressing, but you'll do some, push-ups, some downward dog type action, some shoulder circles, etc. Stuff that just like actually moves the joints you're going to be utilizing, but is less specific at first. And you might just run through this for like 3 to 5 minutes just to get, number one, it'll start to increase your core temperature. It'll increase the tissue specific temperature, but it'll start to move the joints through that range of motion. And the advantage is that it won't be highly fatiguing, because as you mentioned, a big problem is that if you have to warm up a lot throughout the day, you're going to start to get a lot more fatigued. So if we can find ways to mitigate that, it'll be huge. So let's say like you do your first event, it's like a car deadlift, you do proper thorough warm up for that. And then you've got an hour before you go into a pressing medley. And then before the pressing medley, you just literally wear a sweater, wear some pants, etc. And then like 15 minutes before, you just start doing some general easy shoulder circles, some twists, etc. for 5 minutes. Then you've got 10 minutes left before you're going to go into the event. You go and do some actual pressing and work up reasonably so that you got 3 to 5 minutes before you get into the full event. And you can just do 5, 10 minutes, whatever you can account for, to just start doing some actual pressing and event specific movements with what you have available. Because as you point out, it's not necessarily going to be ideal. You might have to work up into a pressing event of like 270 pound log press, and you only have log and weight up to 205 pounds. So you'll just work up as close as you can, be as prepared as possible, and then have some time to rest and go into the event. When we look at most of the research on rest duration and optimizing performance, because strongman is strong lifting stuff, you realistically want to have at least like 5 minutes between your last warm-up set and going into the competitive event. So you want to try to accommodate and leave that kind of space. So in an ideal world, you're going to start doing some general warm-up like 15, 20 minutes before, get a few specific reps in. And this is something you should prepare for. And then have like 5 to 10 minutes of just active rest, walking around, moving, leading into your event.
Yeah, I think I talk about that a lot with my clients. I think we kind of, with concerning the layered jackets, we kind of confuse warming up with getting ready when we're like, no, like, I mean, warm up, right? We're actually raising your internal body temperature. And I think kind of know that, but we don't actually realize that's what we're doing. That's a huge aspect. Like, yeah, like when I wrestled and I swam, like I mean, that just makes a lot of sense. Every other sport does it. I don't know why we don't do it. Like, we should start doing it. I'm gonna start doing that. It just obvious. And the good thing is about if you have your body temperature up, and then your muscles are more pliable, so that makes that whole process easier, and so on and so forth. So I mean, I think honestly, like, that's ingenious. It's most ingenious ideas are just simple, right? I did not think about that. Like, that could, again, that could be a huge movement next comp you go to. Everyone's walking around in big thermal winter jackets. I guess that would make sense because you have on your knee sleeves and everything, and just throwing a big thermal jacket around. You don't have to take anything off. I don't know. I would market that if I was Cerberus or one of these. Market your own little.
If you talk about other sports doing this, go and watch the sidelines of football games. Like, it's literally essentially what they do at most NFL games. You just see guys come off and they throw on lots of warm jackets. Yeah,
it makes total sense. Easy peasy. Oh, so I wanted to, on that note, I think we may have discussed this some. So what's your viewpoint on, say, like, post activation potential? So let's say you're going to be doing Atlas stone, so maybe you could do some like squat jumps or something. I was even thinking for like farmer carries, like maybe warm up obviously, but then maybe do some like short sprints, kind of get your legs ready. What's your idea on post activation potential, how that might be a method to get ready to go quickly?
The short answer is I think it has a lot of potential. The downside is that it might be fatiguing for someone if they have a big day of events and they're not necessarily in quote unquote good shape. So a lot of people that compete in strength athletics maybe don't have the best general physical preparedness. And so if you do have to spend 4 to 6 hours doing multiple events and you are just not used to that, like you are not able to handle that as it is, doing these higher intensity things, which might make you better for the event you're about to go into, might also make you more taxed for the rest of the day. Like, just because when we look at the ability to have a legitimate effect from something like a post-activation potentiation, like if you were to do the sprint, as you said, so you're about to do a good transfer over would be if you're about to do a truck pull, something like a sprint would have a very good post-activation potentiation into the event, similar mechanics, the drive, etc. So that should theoretically transfer over well. But to have that, you'd probably have to do a few sprints at a decent amount of effort. They don't have to be far, but you're looking at 3 to 4 15-yard sprints and having a full effort on them. Because if you do like a 70% effort sprint, it's not going to actually have that like it'll still warm you up, but it's not necessarily going to get you that neurological stimulus to then transfer over. So that's where the one downside would come, is that if you have to do 3 15-yard sprints and you just get tired from that as it is, well, then you're going to be tired going into your truck pull. In contrast, if you train that way and you're used to doing stuff like that, or if you're just generally more fit, you do some regular aerobic conditioning and you're just a strongman who is able to not get tired walking up a flight of stairs, then you're going to be in a position where you can probably take advantage of this stuff. And you just have to make sure you leave time for that in your warm-up. But you will run into the side effect of that. If you try to do that for lots of events throughout the day, you're going to end up becoming more fatigued.
Yeah. I think the answer would be to, prepare for that, right? Like I said, it is what it is. We don't actually prepared. Like, strongmen don't like running, if there is a method that could improve your performance, maybe don't cut that out because you're not prepared. Maybe you should get prepared, right? But yeah, again, like we've talked about this before, that's like a big part of this SIG, is that would be cool to see a study on, right? How does sprinting affect the performance on truck pulls? squat, how does squat jumps improve the effect on deadlifts? I mean, that might actually, I don't, that has the most chance of actually have been done. I don't know. I don't think I've seen anything, but yeah, but again, like there's such a lack of studies, but there's so many interesting things, which is why we're doing this SIG to kind of hope to get these questions started. All right, cool.